I came home from a rodeo in Amarillo expecting to feed my horses, crack open a beer, and sit on my porch like I'd done 1,000 times before. Instead, I found out an entire gated neighborhood had buried their sewer line under my ranch without asking me, without paying me, without even thinking I'd notice. And the wildest part is, by the time it was over, those people were basically paying me every month just to flush their toilets. Now, if you've never lived out in West Texas, you probably think land disputes are all cowboy movie stuff. Old men arguing over fences and cattle wandering through broken gates. But out where I live, land is personal. My grandfather used to say a man's land remembers everything. Every drought, every storm, every handshake, and every betrayal. That ranch had been in my family since 1952. 72 acres outside a little town called Blackwater Ridge, nothing fancy, just open pasture, mesquite trees, a creek that only behaved half the year, and an old red barn my granddad built with his own hands after coming home from Korea. I still remember being 8 years old, sitting in that barn while he sharpened tools and told me, "Never let anybody take from you what they didn't earn." At the time I thought he was talking about cattle. Turns out he meant people in general. See, over the years, the town changed. Developers started creeping farther out from Dallas, buying up cheap land, and turning cattle fields into these polished little suburban kingdoms with names like Silver Pines and River Glen Estates. Places with fake stone entrances, decorative windmills, and HOA boards full of people who thought owning cowboy boots made them ranchers. About 5 years before all this happened, they built one right next to my property. Briar Hollow Estates. Beige houses packed together, so tight you could sneeze through your kitchen window and hit your neighbor's dog. I didn't bother them. They didn't bother me, at least not at first. But little by little, complaints started rolling in. One family said my horses smelled bad. Another complained my barn lights ruined their evening ambience. One woman actually came to my gate wearing yoga pants and holding a little white dog like it was royalty, asking if I could move the cows farther back because her children found them emotionally aggressive. I swear to God, I almost laughed myself unconscious right there in the driveway. Still, I kept things civil. My dad taught me a long time ago that peace and quiet are worth more than winning stupid arguments. So I smiled, nodded, and went back to minding my own business. Then came the rodeo weekend. I was gone 3 days, helping a buddy down in Amarillo with a livestock event. Nothing unusual. Before leaving, I checked my fences, filled the troughs, locked the barn, same routine I'd done for years. Everything looked normal when I pulled out Friday morning. But Sunday night, the second I turned onto my dirt road, something felt wrong. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the headlights catching something they shouldn't have. I don't know. But halfway down the property line, I spotted tire tracks, huge ones, fresh and deep, cutting across my back pasture. Not truck tracks either, heavy equipment. My stomach tightened immediately. I parked near the barn and grabbed a flashlight. The farther I walked, the stranger it got. There were piles of fresh dirt pushed into long mounds like graves. Bright orange paint sprayed across the grass. Little survey flags fluttering in the wind. And then I saw the trench. It ran straight across my land toward Briar Hollow Estates. Deep enough to bury a man standing up. I just stood there for a second listening to the wind move through the grass because honestly, my brain didn't want to accept what my eyes were seeing. I climbed down into the trench and crouched near one section where the dirt looked loose. Then I grabbed a shovel from the ATV and started digging. About 2 feet down, the metal edge hit something hard. Clack! White PVC pipe. Big one too, at least 18 inches wide. Brand new. I remembered just staring at it under the flashlight beam while this slow anger started building in my chest. Not explosive anger. Worse than that. The kind that gets quiet first. Because right then I knew exactly what had happened. Somebody from that neighborhood had decided my ranch was easier to use than their own property. Somebody looked at my land and figured some old rancher wouldn't notice a sewer line buried under 70 acres. And standing there in that trench with dirt on my boots and cold wind blowing through the pasture, I realized they had made a very expensive mistake. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, all I could picture was sewage flowing under my grandfather's land, while some HOA board sat around sipping wine thinking they'd gotten away with it. Around 4 in the morning, I finally gave up, made coffee, and sat out on the porch watching the sun come up over the pasture. Usually mornings out there calm me down. That morning just made me madder. Because the more I thought about it, the more deliberate it felt. This wasn't some contractor making a mistake. You don't accidentally bring excavators onto somebody's ranch, dig a trench across private property, install commercial-grade sewer pipe, then cover it up without knowing exactly what you're doing. Somebody signed off on it. Somebody approved it. And somebody probably laughed about it afterward. By 8 o'clock, I was at the county records office in Blackwater Ridge. Tiny little building, smelled like old paper and burnt coffee. Linda was working the front desk, same woman who'd been there since Clinton was president. She saw me walk in carrying photos from the ranch and immediately said, "Uh-oh, somebody die or somebody sue you?" I dropped the pictures on her desk and said, "Maybe both." She helped me pull the property plats, easement filings, utility permits, all of it. Took almost 2 hours. And sure enough, nothing. No easement application. No utility agreement. No county authorization to cross my land. Legally speaking, that pipe might as well have been a stolen car parked in my backyard. Linda leaned back in her chair and just whistled. "Honey," she said, "if this is what I think it is, somebody's about to have a real bad month." Turns out Briar Hollow had been expanding fast. Too fast. Their sewer infrastructure couldn't handle the new homes, and the county had already denied one of their expansion requests because rerouting the lines properly would have cost a fortune. So instead of spending the money, somebody decided to cut straight through my ranch and hope nobody noticed. And honestly, if I'd been gone another month, I might never have found it. That's the part that still gets me. They were counting on me being invisible, counting on the old rancher minding his own business while they used his property like free real estate. I left the records office and drove straight to my attorney, an old friend named Walter Griggs. Walter was one of those dry West Texas lawyers who looked half asleep all the time until somebody mentioned litigation. Then suddenly, he came alive like a coyote smelling blood. I spread the photos across his desk and explained everything. Halfway through, he started grinning. By the end, he was laughing so hard he had to take his glasses off. "Son," he said, wiping tears from his eyes, "do you have any idea what these idiots just handed you?" I figured he meant a lawsuit. Maybe damages. Maybe a settlement. Walter shook his head. No, bigger than that. You don't sue them yet." "Why not?" I asked. "Because if you sue immediately, they'll panic, reroute the line, pay a fine, and move on. But right now," he leaned forward smiling like the devil himself, "right now, every toilet flush in that neighborhood depends on your goodwill." I'll admit it. Hearing that changed something in me. Up until then, I was angry. But now I started thinking strategically. Walter explained that because there was no easement, the HOA was exposed from every direction. Civil penalties, environmental violations, trespassing, unauthorized utility construction. If the county got involved before they fixed it, Briar Hollow could be facing millions in infrastructure replacement costs. And the timing couldn't have been worse for them because home sales in that subdivision were already slowing down. A public scandal about illegal sewer systems? That could tank property values overnight. "So what do we do?" I asked. Walter smiled. "We make ourselves indispensable." The following Thursday was the Briar Hollow monthly HOA board meeting. Walter told me not to warn them ahead of time. "Surprise is leverage," he said. So that evening I put on my clean pearl snap shirt, drove into Briar Hollow, and parked outside their clubhouse. You ever walk into a room where everybody immediately decides they don't like you? That's exactly what it felt like. The clubhouse looked like a furniture showroom pretending to be a luxury lodge. Fake stone fireplace, leather chairs nobody actually sat in, bowls of decorative pine cones. Around 12 people sat at a polished conference table discussing landscaping budgets like they were negotiating world peace. Then there was Carl Whitaker, HOA president. Late 50s, spray tan, expensive watch, smile so fake it looked painted on. Carl had always acted polite around me, but it was the kind of polite rich people use when they think you're beneath them. "Mr. Mercer," he said when I walked in, "this is a private meeting." I closed the door behind me and laid the survey photos across the table. "Good," I said. "Then we can discuss this privately." The room went quiet almost immediately. Carl looked down at the photos, and I watched the color leave his face in real time. Not all at once, slow, like somebody draining water from a sink. One of the board members whispered, "Oh my God." Carl recovered fast, though. I'll give him that. Guys like him survive by pretending confidence even when they're drowning. He leaned back in his chair and gave me this little smirk. "I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation." "There better be." I said. Because from where I'm standing, your neighborhood buried an illegal sewer line across 72 acres of my property. One woman immediately started blaming contractors. Another guy said they assumed permits had already been approved. Carl kept trying to regain control of the room. Now let's not overreact, he said. This is community infrastructure. I laughed right in his face. Community infrastructure doesn't magically erase property law, Carl. Then I handed him copies of the county records. No easements, no permits, no approvals, just raw trespassing buried underground. The silence after that got heavy. You could hear the air conditioner humming. Somebody at the far end of the table quietly muttered, "We are screwed." Carl glared at him like he wanted to kill him. Then Carl turned back to me, trying one last time to posture his way out of it. "What exactly do you want here, Mr. Mercer?" And that right there was the moment everything shifted. Because suddenly the man who thought my ranch was disposable was asking me for terms. I looked around that room at all those expensive watches, perfect haircuts, and nervous faces, and honestly, I thought about my grandfather. About all the years my family protected that land, while people like this treated it like an obstacle. Then I sat down slowly, folded my hands, and said, "Here's what's going to happen." Nobody in that room moved. I had 12 pairs of eyes locked on me, and for the first time since walking into that clubhouse, Carl Whitaker stopped smiling. Not completely. Just enough for me to see the panic underneath it. I slid a folder across the table toward him. Walter had prepared everything the night before, nice and clean, real professional looking. "You're going to lease the utility access from me," I said. "Long term." Carl opened the folder, skimmed the first page, and nearly choked. $10,000 a month, he snapped. "Are you insane?" I shrugged. "No, Carl. Insane would be digging a sewer trench across somebody else's ranch and hoping they never noticed." One of the board members, an older woman named Denise, grabbed the papers from him and started flipping through them. The farther she read, the wider she got. 50-year agreement, she whispered. "Automatic increases every 5 years. That's right," I said. "And if a payment is missed, the easement gets revoked immediately." Carl slammed the folder shut. "You can't blackmail us." "Funny," I said, "because I remember somebody burying a sewage pipe under my property without permission. That sounds a whole lot more like blackmail than paperwork." A younger board member leaned forward nervously. "What happens if we don't sign?" I looked directly at him. "Then tomorrow morning I call the county environmental office, the state utility commission, and every local news station within 200 miles. Nobody said a word. "And once inspectors show up," I continued, "they'll shut that line down until it's brought into compliance. Which means every toilet in Briar Hollow stops working." One guy actually whispered, "Jesus Christ." Carl stood up so fast his chair rolled backward. "You think you can extort this community because you own a few acres of dirt?" That one hit a nerve. I stood too. "A few acres of dirt?" I said quietly. "My grandfather is buried on that land." The room got real still after that. Even Carl realized he'd stepped too far. I walked slowly around the table while they watched me. "You people moved out here because you wanted the country lifestyle, the views, the peace and quiet. But none of you respected the people who were already here." Denise looked down embarrassed. A couple others couldn't even meet my eyes anymore. But Carl still looked angry. "Guys like him can't stand losing control. This won't hold up in court," he muttered. I smiled a little. "Maybe not. But court takes time. And until then," I leaned closer, "nobody in your neighborhood flushes a toilet without my permission." That was the line that broke them. Not emotionally, financially. You could actually see them doing the math in their heads. Hundreds of homes, families, property values, lawsuits from residents, emergency reconstruction costs, media coverage. They weren't scared of me. They were scared of chaos. HOA people love control more than anything on earth. And suddenly I was holding all of it. The meeting ended without a deal that night, but I knew they were done fighting. You could feel it. Carl tried making a few calls afterward, probably searching for some legal loophole to save himself, but there wasn't one. The next morning Walter called me laughing. "They hired 3 different law firms overnight," he said. "Every single one told them the same thing, which is, pay the rancher." 3 days later, Carl came out to my property himself. That alone was worth the price of admission. I watched his Mercedes crawl down my dirt road like the suspension was personally offended. He got out wearing loafers that sank straight into the mud beside the barn. I made him stand there for a minute while I finished feeding the horses. Petty? Maybe. but I'd be lying if I said I didn't enjoy it. Finally, I walked over and said, "Morning, Carl." He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, jaw tight. "The board is prepared to sign," he said flatly. "Smart decision." He hesitated before speaking again. "You really would have shut it down, wouldn't you?" I looked out across the pasture for a second before answering. "You know what the funny part is?" I said. "If somebody from your neighborhood had knocked on my door 6 months ago and just asked honestly, we probably could have worked something out for almost nothing." Carl didn't say anything, because deep down, he knew I was right. This whole mess happened because people with money sometimes mistake courtesy for weakness. They thought being rural meant being stupid. They thought owning land for generations made me old-fashioned enough to ignore what they were doing. Instead, they handed me leverage. We signed the agreement that afternoon right there at my kitchen table. 50 years. Monthly payments. Rate increases locked in. Full maintenance liability on the HOA. And my favorite clause of all, if the line ever caused environmental damage, Briar Hollow paid every cent of cleanup costs. Walter called it the prettiest contract he'd ever written. After Carl left, I sat on the porch with a glass of sweet tea and watched the sun go down over the ranch. Same pasture, same barn, same creek running through the backfield. But something felt different. My grandfather used to believe land carried memory. Maybe he was right. Because standing there that evening, I realized the ranch had protected me the same way I'd spent years protecting it. Every month since then, Briar Hollow sends me a check. $10,000, right on schedule. Sometimes more after the increases kicked in. And every now and then, when I drive past that fancy little subdivision and see people walking their dogs or arguing over HOA parking rules, I can't help but laugh a little knowing every shower they take, every dishwasher cycle, every single toilet flush sends money straight into my pocket. Carl moved away about 2 years later. Rumor is the residents blamed him for the whole disaster once the story leaked out. Last I heard, Briar Hollow homeowners are still paying special utility fees to cover the agreement. Funny thing is, some of the newer residents probably don't even know why. They just know there's this mysterious charge buried in the HOA budget every month. And honestly, I sleep just fine knowing that. But I'll ask you this. If somebody secretly used your land, your property, something your family spent generations building, would you have taken the money like I did, or would you have burned the whole thing down out of principle? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoy stories about revenge, property wars, and people finally getting exactly what they deserve, hit subscribe. Because trust me, out here in Texas, this kind of thing happens a lot more than folks think.